part by viewers like you and by the following.
Former White Sox pitcher and announcer Ed Farmer was thrown the biggest curveball of his life when he was told the only thing that could save him was organ donation.
My brother Tom, he's the guy that gave me my life back because I was dying. 3 more days, I was going to be gone.
Ed lived nearly 30 years because of the kidney donation. His legacy will live on through the White Sox and this life-saving program. Join the Illinois Secretary of State's Organ Tissue Donor Registry.
I always say, heaven knows you can't take them with you.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
Sunday on PBS, starting with Call the Midwife.
He hasn't slept, he hasn't eaten.
I can't take it. Please come.
Then Sanditon on Masterpiece.
The right person is out there for all of us. Happily, I found mine.
Followed by Before We Die.
I think you better go, Billy.
I was trying to protect you.
It's a night of drama you won't want to miss.
We're the 2021 graduates from Walter Payton College Prep.
And you're watching WTTW.
Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer, supporting quality journalism.
Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first, some of today's top stories. Yet another former Chicago alderman is federally indicted. This time, former City Council Zoning Committee Chair Danny Solis. Solis is charged with bribery and was first reported by the Sun-Times to have worn a wire to collect key evidence in the federal cases of former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and longtime Alderman Ed Burke. It's believed that this charge is part of a deferred prosecution agreement in exchange for Solis's cooperation in those massive federal investigations. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson marked her historic confirmation as the first black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. She was confirmed yesterday by the full Senate on a 53-47 vote, which included 3 GOP senators voting in the affirmative. Today, President Joe Biden praised Jackson's character and her ability to withstand what he called verbal abuse during the long and sometimes contentious hearings. The process was shepherded by Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, who is chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Jackson spoke about the significance of her historic appointment.
It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. But we've made it.
One of Chicago's 3 casino finalists says it plans to launch a temporary riverboat casino while it builds a permanent structure. Rush Street Gaming's proposal for a casino on the spot known as the 78 got a public airing today at a community engagement meeting. The operator also runs Rivers Casino in Des Plaines. Representatives told community members they would have a temporary riverboat docked to the site up and running within 6 months of approval if that proposal goes forward. The 78 is the parcel of land south of Roosevelt Road along the south branch of the Chicago River. Hard Rock and Bally's also presented their plans to community members throughout the week, and we'll have more on all of these proposals in just a bit. And a longtime Chicago weather anchor has died. Jim Ramsey spent 30 years as weatherman for WGN-TV. He retired in 2017 after 42 total years in broadcasting. Ramsey was 69 years old. And now we go to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Dave McKinney of WBEZ, our own Heather Sharon, Laura Washington of the Chicago Sun-Times and ABC 7 Chicago, and Brandon Pope of WCIU. Let's get right into it with this Solis news. Dave McKinney, is it pretty clear that this is a deferred prosecution agreement for his role cooperating in the Madigan and Burke investigations?
Sorry about that. Yeah, it sure looks like it. That's that seems to be the way they worked with Commonwealth Edison in July of 2020. Similar situation here where Solis is such a vital cooperating witness for the federal government. I mean, involved in both the Burke case and the Madigan case. So this is sort of a piece of, I guess you could say, federal bookkeeping that has to happen to get this deferred prosecution agreement set into stone.
And Solis, of course, wearing that wire that produced perhaps the key evidence in both cases, or at least some of the key evidence. So, Laura Washington, does this mean that Solis likely won't go to jail? Because remember, he had his own case where he was in a lot of hot water.
Well, that remains to be seen. Because of the cooperation and because of the fact that they're going to continue to need his cooperation, because who knows when either one of these cases, the Madigan or Burke cases, are going to go to trial. They're going to want to make sure that Solis is happy and content, and so it's not clear whether or not he'll go to jail. But I don't think anything is going to happen until these cases go to trial.
All right, let's go over to the mayor's race. Southwest Side Alderman Ray Lopez officially announced that he is running for mayor of Chicago. Here he is on Chicago Tonight last evening.
I believe that right now, the things that I've done in my ward, the leadership I have shown in my communities, needs to be an example for which we move the city forward. I am all in as it comes to leading this city and providing hope for those who feel that we are at the cusp or at the brink.
Heather Sharon, Ray Lopez is perhaps Mayor Lightfoot's most vociferous critic. What does he bring to this race?
Well, he brings a relatively conservative point of view. He has consistently been pro-police, anti-COVID-19 vaccine mandate, and anti-police misconduct settlement. He has really led the charge meeting after meeting, pushing back against recommendations from the city's law department to settle these cases, sometimes for millions of dollars, saying that essentially it gives criminals sort of an open way of trying to exploit the city. And now, as much as we talk about sort of his positions, he's also, approached sort of the city council in a way that few other alder people have. He is not afraid to use state law to call special meetings, and he has directly confronted Mayor Lightfoot on those issues and any number, including during the George Floyd protests in the summer of 2020, where the two really went head to head during a meeting during the worst of the unrest.
And Brandon Pope, Ray Lopez is kind of close with Ed Burke, or has been over the years. Do you think Ed Burke perhaps might get some excitement seeing a candidate take on Lightfoot when Lightfoot has really been harsh on Ed Burke?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure Ed Burke is smiling ear to ear right now. It was no secret Alderman Raymond Lopez was definitely eyeing a run for mayor, and now he's the first to officially throw his hat in the ring here. Ed Burke is going to be a question mark, definitely as we talk about corruption, and we talk about his ties to Ed Burke and his opposition to this mayor, and what some have viewed as, some perceived slights that Ed Burke has had towards Mayor Lightfoot. So that's going to be interesting to watch. I'm also intrigued, as Heather alluded to, the fact that we do have a fairly conservative alderman here. He just appeared on Fox News with Tucker Carlson not too long ago. He's going to be pushing public safety hard, but this might be one of those years where, that's what's on everyone's mind right now here in Chicago is public safety and crime. He's going to still have to balance, though, that pro-police rhetoric with the real concerns of people on the ground about police violence. We still have a consent decree right now that the DOJ has sent our way, but hasn't been fulfilled. So I'm curious how he's going to strike that balance, and it's something that it's going to be really interesting to watch going forward.
And indeed, he's
another thing, Paris. Another thing, Paris, is that even though he is very much pro-police, he came out swinging at Police Superintendent David Brown at his press conference where he made his announcement and said on day one, if I'm mayor, he's gone, which of course that got him a lot of headlines, but it also is an interesting contrast to the fact he's pro-police, but yet he doesn't like this particular police administration. I think in terms of his conservative credentials, that's going to give him, I think he would be eyeing a lane that would reach out to more conservative Democrats on the Southwest and Northwest sides, perhaps a Latino vote, and he's probably guessing that might, given that there's going to be a crowded race there, that might give him enough base to at least get into the runoff.
Indeed, in saying he's going to get rid of Police Superintendent David Brown might not be the most unpopular position with some of the rank and file police members in the FOP. Dave McKinney, we also have an election document circulating now, Quigley for Chicago, seeming to indicate he is about to jump into the mayor's race. Would you say that's a sure bet, or is he still figuring this out?
I'd say that's the big toe in the water right there. And I think, you have 8, 10, 11, 12 people that are all kind of circling out there. And, you have a race like that. It really kind of, it's a jump ball in a way. Mayor Lightfoot, I think, as Brandon points out, she's got to confront this crime problem. And when it enters everyone's orbits, you hear shootings on your block or there are carjackings down the street, that's front and center on people's minds. And so I agree with you, Brandon. That's going to be the big issue here that somebody in this field is going to have to confront.
And one of the ways that the mayor is trying to combat this problem is this new $5 million proposal for rebates for businesses and individuals that buy security cameras, either on their garage door or in the front of their business. Heather Sharon, what's the thinking behind this proposal?
Well, the idea is that the police need a little bit of help. And one of the most effective tools the Chicago Police Department has is this video camera system that I'm sure Laura Washington remembers was created in the 90s, was hugely controversial, but has now sort of been accepted as a crime-fighting tool. And the hope is that the city, if the city gives these rebates, homeowners and property owners will be more likely to either give that video to police if there's an incident, or even allow the police to hook into their camera and put that into the giant system that sort of is webbing over the city. And the idea is that, one, you will catch people doing criminal acts and you will be able to put them in jail, because nothing speaks to a jury or a judge like videotape of the crime itself. And also it will help people feel more protected, because I think, I think Dave and Brandon are exactly right, that the perception of crime is perhaps just as much of a problem as the actual crime problem in Chicago. And if you feel like you're protected, that I think can help people feel safer. And I think that will increase Mayor Lightfoot's chances of reelection. But that's really a drop in the bucket. It is not going to help a lot of people. And I think it's important to remember that most homeowners who can afford to lay out that cash for cameras are in wealthy parts of the city where crime is still relatively rare, especially when you compare it to parts of the South and the West Side, which are suffering most seriously during this surge.
Brandon Pope, on the other side of this ledger, folks, civil libertarians worry about the increased surveillance state, Big Brother, and whether or not this is closed circuit or where police will be able to take advantage, tap into this. Do you think more aldermen will buy into the public safety line, or the concerns about overexposure of surveillance?
I think more are going to buy into the public safety line. I think we've reached a point in society where, now when police are solving crimes, they're looking at other video around the neighborhood to try to find every angle they possibly can. So giving incentive for people to have video surveillance could only help. I do feel like it feels like a little bit too late with this measure. It's a great idea, great concept, but why now and not a year ago, 2 years ago, when people really, really, really needed these home security systems? And as Heather pointed out too, the rebate itself, that doesn't alleviate all the concerns, because you still have to shell out that money. And if you're not making that much in a paycheck, putting down that money for a security system and not knowing when you're going to get that money back, that's still a tight pinch. So there's still a lot of questions to be answered here.
Certainly very expensive as gas is these days. Laura Washington, the mayor's $12 million gas tax rebate program stalled. She's trying to tweak it now to make it so that the income eligibility threshold is lower. Do you think these kinds of changes will win over skeptical aldermen?
Well, so far it has not. The proposal got stalled in the city council. Alderman Pat Dowell, who was in charge of shepherding it out of her committee, was not able to get it out. And you're right, it has been tweaked. There was a lot of discomfort with the high bar that was set, the original high bar that was set for who would be eligible and qualify for these breaks. But I think there's also a lot of skepticism that this is just another one of these election day gimmies, and that this is a cheap way of buying votes, giving people some gas cards, $50 gas cards, giving them some CTA passes that only get them a few rides on the CTA. And some people are cynically saying that the mayor is trying to mirror what Willie Wilson did, who's likely to be another mayoral candidate a couple of weeks ago when he did the gas giveaways. It's just an example of politicians, would-be and elected officials trying to buy votes. That's the way it's been perceived, at least by Lightfoot's critics.
And Willie Wilson intending to announce his decision on Monday. Heather Sharon, the 3 casino proposals went before public community hearings this week. We've got Hard Rock, Bally's, and Rush Street Gaming. How have neighbors taken to these proposals?
None of them seemed to pass muster. There were concerns about traffic. There were concerns about crimes. There was concerns about gambling addiction. And none of the casino proposals were really greeted by these communities as a solution to what ails them. And I think it sets up a really interesting dynamic, because now the ball shifts back into Mayor Lightfoot's court. She will have to make a decision and make a recommendation to a special city council committee to locate where this casino would go. But in none of these communities did we really hear a significant number of residents saying, yes, we want this casino here. We think it will improve our neighborhood. And what's interesting is that the 2 neighborhoods that sort of spoke out the most were River West, which is sort of a very white, wealthy community, saying we don't want this traffic most of all. And then you also heard a lot of criticism from people who live in Chinatown who don't want to see the casino built on the 78, which is very close to their community, saying they're concerned that it will exacerbate problem gambling in their community. And then, of course, you have people who just said, look, the 78 was supposed to be a new neighborhood of Chicago. Why put a casino there? So there are still a lot of questions, and we're at least 2 months away from the mayor making a decision. So there are, again, lots of questions that remain to be answered.
And I could see perhaps the older people in each of these 3 general areas being opposed to it, but then their colleagues perhaps having to go against their will, against the aldermanic prerogative, if one of these proposals is going to pass muster. Let's move on to some state news. The General Assembly is scheduled to adjourn its abbreviated spring session today. Among other legislation, voting is scheduled for the $45 billion Illinois state budget reached yesterday by the governor and Democratic House and Senate leaders. Take a quick look at what Governor J.B. Pritzker had to say.
Leaders in both chambers have come to an agreement on yet another responsible, balanced budget. Because of our focus on fiscal balance, this budget will provide over $1.8 billion in tax relief to Illinois residents, while at the same time restoring $1 billion to our state's long-depleted rainy day fund.
David Kinney, we're expecting any time in the next several hours that they'll officially vote on this budget, and it includes, as he said, about $1.8 billion in tax relief, direct tax relief. So what are Illinoisans going to be seeing into their pocketbooks out of this budget?
Well, I mean, they've kind of covered the gamut here. I mean, there's a suspension of a 1% tax on groceries that would be part of this. It would last a year. There's they would stall an increase in the motor fuel tax due to take effect in July. They would stall that for 6 months. They're talking about property tax rebates up to $300 per homeowner, checks for just about everybody. Well, for anybody making less than $200,000 a year. $50 per adult, $100 per kid, up to 3. So it's just a gigantic giveaway kind of thing here. And I've been covering these budgets for, and this ages me in a way I'm afraid to admit on television, but like almost 30 years of watching budgets here, and I can't remember one like this where there's just been so much money involved. Where usually it's a story of gloom and doom, and here you've got those giveaways. You've also got the governor and the 2 legislative leaders putting $1 billion into a rainy day fund. I mean, that's never happened. Another $500 million more than what they are required to put into the state pension systems. That has never happened. And so it's just like they've got all this money that is there because of surging sales and income tax revenues, plus $8 billion in federal pandemic relief money that has really made all this possible. So that's probably going to be it's just it'll get out of the General Assembly on a freight train tonight, get signed probably very quickly, and then
they all want to go campaign on it because
they're going to campaign, and these checks will be in the mail before the election.
Right. So politics certainly playing a role here. I want to move on to a story that WTTW has been investigating. Our latest story found that developers involved with the $128 million rehab of an old Aurora hospital, Copley, hired the recent ex-wife of Mayor Richard Irvin. Irvin, of course, is running for Illinois governor on the Republican ticket. That group is getting $15 million in public aid with the possibility of much more here in a TIF. So this follows our investigations tracking contracts and incentives that went to companies in Aurora that donated to Irvin and the campaign of his private practice law partner, Brittany Pedersen. She is running as a Democrat for Kane County judge. We have not been able to reach Irvin himself, only campaign spokespersons issuing statements. Laura Washington, when you look at the totality of this and this trend here, what kind of questions do you believe Irvin needs to answer if he does indeed face reporters again?
Well, it doesn't look like he's in any big hurry to face reporters on these issues and many other issues. He has been unwilling. As you know, he's been asked to participate in forums and debates, and he's basically stringing the host along and not responding. The questions here mainly revolve around whether or not this is an example of pay to play. So as far as I know from your reporting, Paris, you haven't been able to find anything that's blatantly illegal in this, but it doesn't look good. It looks like there's favoritism happening that because of Irvin's position as mayor, he's been able to use that influence to bring in developers, to bring in city contractors who take care of him, perhaps his ex-wife, who take care of his friends, and it doesn't reflect well on somebody who's running a very high-profile gubernatorial campaign at a time when corruption and the Mike Madigan story, the Ed Burke story, when those are so top of mind for voters. Yeah,
Dave McKinney, I mean, Ken Griffin is the person donating $20 million to Irvin's campaign. He has said, among other things, he believes Irvin's the guy to clean up that waste and corruption. When you see the reality of his record here, does it put a dent into that message? Is that something that voters respond to, especially when you have, campaign ads that are just blanketing the airwaves nonstop?
Well, I mean, there has to be a campaign ad waiting to be made off of this story, Paris, because it's just, you're talking about the state's second largest city. You're talking about, he's the guy in charge of it. There's a lot of money going through city government there, and of course you can only imagine that it's being scrutinized, by reporters like you and me and Laura, everybody, Heather, and it's just like, it's out there to be done. But I think for Irvin, the real question is, the ballot is going to be taking shape here in a couple of weeks, because we'll have, we'll know for sure who survives objections to their petitions. But once that gets settled, Irvin really has to worry about, the conservative flank of the party. Darren Bailey is he's cleaning up downstate. There's a lot of enthusiasm behind him among some of the real Trump-friendly, downstate, hardcore Republicans. And so Irvin's got to figure out a way to reach those people, because, in the last GOP gubernatorial primary, 53% of the vote, I think, came from south of Interstate 80. So there's a built-in advantage for Bailey down there. So, Irvin has to fend off stories like this, plus figure out a way to reach those Trump voters.
Certainly a long way to go before the primary, and I have not seen any polling to my knowledge, that shows who's ahead or where this race stands. I also want to move on to some stories about the Secretary of State candidate, Ana Valencia. Her husband is a lobbyist. She's city clerk. She's steered initiatives that have directly benefited his clients, and he has not disclosed all of his conflicts of interest on his ethics form. Heather Sharon, what kind of fallout does Valencia face from this?
Well, it's interesting because this story has really blunted the momentum she was building in this race. She won the endorsement of Secretary of State Jesse White, a more beloved figure in Illinois politics I cannot think of, and Governor J.B. Pritzker, and she seemed to really be making inroads in her bid against Alexi Giannoulias and Alderman David Moore. And this has really raised questions about exactly for whose benefit she was working in the city clerk's office. And the Secretary of State's office is responsible for really a sprawling bureaucracy across the state, and it touches every Illinois resident, whether you have a state ID or a driver's license, and it also has an important role to play with the voter registration system. So I think these questions really go to sort of the heart of whether or not she is capable of running that system in an ethical and above board way. Now, she says she's done nothing wrong and that any oversights in her ethics forms were oversights and have been corrected, but there have now been 2 news organizations that have found issues with those forms. And, you know, it's one of those old things where, you know, if there's smoke, sometimes there's fire. And I think it is probably an indication that those forms are going to get looked at much more closely.
Right.
And the city clerk, this is her first elected position, so this is really her entire record that she's running.
A lot of questions she's going to have to answer, and of course the Secretary of State's office is where the massive licenses for bribes scandal happened with former Governor George Ryan, former then Secretary of State. Dave, I want to talk about an investigation you and Dan Milopoulos have been doing with WBEZ, this Illinois company that's made hundreds of millions of dollars off of state debt. Basically, they pay the state vendors that are owed money, and then they collect all the late fees that the state has to dole out. So apparently, from what you found, this company is trying to shield themselves from having to pay taxes on these profits. Can you explain this for us?
Yeah, I mean, my colleague Dan Milopoulos and I stumbled upon a lawsuit, a whistleblower lawsuit that was unsealed. Basically, on behalf of the state, it's alleging that this company called Vendor Assistance Program didn't wind up paying state income taxes on this just vast windfall that it collected. I mean, if you remember, I mean, the state of Illinois, you know, with the 2-year budget impasse under former Governor Rauner, at that point in time especially, the state of Illinois had unpaid bills that totaled something like $17 billion. I mean, that backlog is virtually wiped away. But what would happen is companies like VAP would go around and you know, these various vendors that were waiting to get paid by the state, they would front the money that the state owed these vendors, and in exchange, they would collect late payment penalties on the bill that the state owed. And that could, you know, that left a return of about 12% per year. So it was a great investment. And I mean, you know, just since 2018 alone, this one company had, you know, more than $270 million in late fees.
Incredibly profitable and lucrative. And if folks read your story, connections here to Danny Solis. And as I understand, former Governor Jim Edgar was involved in one of these companies. I don't know if it's the one that you're talking about here, but highly encourage viewers to go check out that investigation. But right now we're out of time, so our thanks to Dave McKinney, Laura Washington, Heather Sharon, and Brandon Pope. And that is our show for this Friday night. We're back for an hour at 7 o'clock next Monday. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe. It's great to have our crew back here, and have a great weekend.